Picture this. You're literally on the front lines of World War II. You're surrounded by complete devastation, and you manage to crack open a tiny, pocket-sized Armed Services edition of a novel. Well, that's exactly what happened to thousands of soldiers who received free copies of Betty Smith's masterpiece. In a letter to the author, one U.S. Marine actually wrote, "I can't explain the emotional reaction that took place in this dead heart of mine. A surge of confidence has swept through me, and I feel that maybe a fellow has a fighting chance in this world after all." I mean, talk about incredible. That is the astonishing emotional weight of the book we're exploring today. Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going on a zoom-in, zoom-out journey through Betty Smith's iconic 1943 novel, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. We're going to unpack the whole shebang, from its massive, overarching cultural footprint right down to its incredibly deep, micro-academic themes. But before we meet the characters, we've got to understand the central metaphor that anchors this entire universe, the Tree of Heaven, or scientifically, Ailanthus altissima. It's this remarkably hardy tree, totally famous for its stubborn, persistent ability to sprout, grow, and actually flourish right out of the cement in the absolute most unlikely, deprived inner-city environments. And this brilliantly illustrates the core drive of our 11-year-old protagonist, Francie Nolan. Just like that tree, Francie is planted in the harsh, impoverished reality of a Brooklyn tenement. But, she possesses this relentless, undeniable desire to better herself. She's always reaching for the light, no matter how many times her circumstances try to cut her down. So let's map out exactly when and how this story unfolds. The novel is broken down into 5 books that basically function as a timeline for the Nolan family. We actually jump back to 1900 in book 2 when Francie's parents, Johnny and Katie, first meet. But the main action, that kicks off in 1912 with 11-year-old Francie. We follow the family through some immense tragedy, including Johnny's death from alcoholism-induced pneumonia on Christmas Day in 1915. We see Francie forced into the workforce when World War I begins in 1917, and it all culminates in 1918 as she prepares to head off to the University of Michigan. It's really this sweeping historical epic, completely compressed into a deeply personal coming-of-age story. Section 1. Welcome to Williamsburg. Let's zoom right into the neighborhood. Because in this novel, Brooklyn isn't just a backdrop. It's a living, breathing character with a pulse of its own. Listen to these names: Scholes, Meserole, Montrose, Johnson Avenue, Siegel Street, Moore, McKibben, Broadway. Betty Smith mapped out early 1900s Williamsburg with such astonishing geographical precision that this book functions almost like a historical street map. Seriously, if you walked through Brooklyn today with this novel in your hand, you could trace the exact path Francie took to Cheap Charlie's or the 5 and 10 cent store. Smith anchors her narrative in extreme, undeniable reality. And it's definitely not just street names. I want to slow down for a second and just absorb the sheer sensory details Smith provides. Quote, "The peculiar smells of the neighborhood, baked stuffed fish, sour rye bread fresh from the oven, and something that smelled like honey boiling, bearded men in their alpaca skullcaps and silkoline coats." Do you see what she's doing there? Her technique proves the difference between merely remembering history and actively reliving it. By layering these rich, hyper-specific smells, sights, and sounds, she perfectly captures the vibrant, diverse, and chaotic energy of immigrant life in New York. Section 2. The Nolan family struggle. Let's look at the people living on these streets. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sharp, almost irreconcilable contrast between Francie's parents. Setting the scene is one thing, right? But a story is only as strong as the people inhabiting it. On one side, we've got Johnny Nolan. He's a charismatic singing waiter, a highly imaginative romantic dreamer, but tragically, a severe alcoholic. He brings the joy, but he simply cannot provide. On the flip side is his wife, Katie Nolan. Extreme poverty has completely stripped away her youthful romanticism, and it's left behind this frigid realism. She is a stoic pragmatist, the ultimate breadwinner, literally keeping her family alive by scrubbing apartment building floors. This dynamic instantly crystallizes the family's central conflict, the battle between soul-feeding idealism and the harsh, cold pragmatism required to just survive the day. And caught directly in the crossfire of this clash are the kids. We have our protagonist, 11-year-old Francie, and her 10-year-old brother, Cornelius, who goes by Neely. Now, Francie shares her father's romantic imagination. She relies heavily on reading to escape their grinding poverty, and she has this relentless drive to rise above her station. But there's a darker, much more complex truth to navigating their world, dealing with Katie's hidden favoritism. See, Katie actually prefers the more robust, outgoing Neely over the often sickly Francie. It's a really painful reality, but it adds incredible depth to their whole family dynamic. Section 3. The complexity of motherhood.
we're going to dive into the academic meat of this story now. To really grasp Katie Nolan's place in literature, we have to look at Professor Chitra V.S.'s research on how mothers are historically written. It's fascinating. In ancient literature, motherhood was purely about fertility and nurture. Think Demeter or Venus. Let's move to and see how this builds. By the medieval and Renaissance periods, the focus heavily shifted to maternal sacrifice, modeled on the Virgin Mary. Then, the 19th century brought realism, showing everyday struggles in the domestic sphere through authors like Jane Austen and Leo Tolstoy. Finally, the 20th century introduced diverse feminist perspectives from writers like Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison, highlighting the intense, hidden, emotional labor of motherhood. And that entire evolution leads exactly to what modern literature does best, subverting those older, simpler archetypes. Instead of just handing us a flawless, comforting mother figure, modern writers started asking the hard questions. Like, what happens to a mother's love when she's absolutely crushed by extreme poverty and the need for pure survival? This perfectly sets up our analysis of Katie Nolan. Professor Chitra's research breaks down Katie Nolan not just as a character, but as a deeply intricate, realistic portrayal of survival. Look at her traits. She has an unyielding resilience and an insane work ethic. She makes immense sacrifices. We're talking literally saving pennies in a tin can bank rather than buying immediate comforts for her family. She holds an unshakable belief that education is the one and only way her children will escape poverty. But most importantly, her motherhood is defined by complex realism. She's flawed, she can be incredibly harsh, and her favoritism toward Neely, actually, it isn't born of malice, it's pragmatic survival. She firmly believes Francie has the internal fire to make it on her own, while Kneeling needs to be pushed. Extreme hardship forces deeply uncomfortable maternal choices. Section 4, Legacy on Screen and Page. Let's zoom back out. We've looked at the micro-level character analysis, right? But how did this incredibly specific story of Brooklyn poverty become a massive, enduring cultural phenomenon? Well, just 2 years after the book was published, Hollywood came calling. This led to a massive success with the 1945 film adaptation, directed by the legendary Elia Kazan. Now, they did make a pretty major timeline shift, compressing the book's 6-year span into just about 1 year. But despite taking that artistic license, the film was critically acclaimed. James Dunn actually won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his heartbreaking portrayal of Johnny Nolan. And young Peggy Ann Garner won a special Academy Juvenile Award for bringing Francie to life. But here's the thing. The book's influence definitely didn't stop at the Oscars. It left an incredible, decades-long footprint on pop culture. Bugs Bunny parodied it in A Hair Grows in Manhattan. It's been referenced in television shows ranging from The Simpsons and Daria to Batman and even Will and Grace. The book's title and themes have heavily influenced music, being directly referenced by hip-hop legends like Jay-Z and Talib Kweli, as well as Olivia Chani. And in literature, it served as a major inspiration for Jeanette Wall's phenomenal memoir, The Glass Castle. So the crucial point is, the legacy of Betty Smith's novels stretches far beyond 1943. It has deeply permeated virtually every single corner of modern pop culture. We've covered the history, the heartbreak, the academic subversions, and the sprawling pop culture legacy. But you know, the true genius of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn is that it isn't just about Francie Nolan. It's a mirror held right up to the reader. So I want to leave you with this question to chew on. What is your tree of heaven? What is that tenacious thing inside you that pushes through the concrete? And furthermore, how does facing extreme hardship shift your own traditional notions of right and wrong, just like it did for the Nolans? If this explainer sparked your curiosity today, I highly recommend picking up the source material and experiencing Francie's journey for yourself. Thanks for exploring this with me, and keep growing.